Is this the biggest fraud in the history of the state of Louisiana?
I would categorize this as one of the biggest frauds in the history of the United States.
Keith Crescione has spent half of his life, 30 years, looking into that alleged fraud. He and his friend Norman Billiot have the paperwork to prove their years of work.
We got 16 boxes right now.
The alleged fraud took place in the 1930s, but stick with us. Eventually, we'll show how it impacts you today.
The general populace, they're going to be shocked because it's one of the biggest raw deals, in my opinion, that the state has ever engaged in. And it continues to be a raw deal.
This story starts in 1934. Former Louisiana governor and at the time U.S. Senator Huey Long set up the Win or Lose Corporation. These old documents show the owner, State Senator James Noe, New Orleans hotel owner Seymour Weiss, and Long's secretary Earl Christenberry. Long left his name off the paperwork, but records show he was a partner of Win or Lose. Long was killed in 1935, but Win or Lose kept operating with his wife and friends. In January of 1936, James Noe became governor of Louisiana. 9 days after his inauguration, he assigned a lucrative oil lease to W.T. Burton, a Lake Charles businessman with little to no experience in drilling oil. This 1936 letterhead shows Burton as a general contractor with specialty in boating, towing, and dredging.
They just invited a wildcat startup oil and gas company.
The lease would be called State Lease 340, 500,000 acres just off the coast of south central Louisiana, much of it in St. Mary Parish. The 1936 deal called for the state to receive 12.5% of the royalties. W.T. Burton would keep the rest. Burton paid the state $75,000 for the lease, and days later assigned a large portion of it to the Texas Company, which later became Texaco. The Texas Company paid Burton $95,000. He quickly made a $20,000 profit. Remember, that's $20,000 in 1936. Burton would keep a portion of the royalties himself. But in February of 1936, he handed over more of his interest in State Lease 340 to the Win or Lose Corporation, Governor James Noe, and late Senator Huey Long's company.
I think it's fraud in political office to be in such a, you're going to be in a business and give yourself state leases like that.
So essentially, James Noe assigned the lease to W.T. Burton, and Burton assigned part of that lease back to Noe and his friends with Win or Lose. It made Noe, Huey Long's family, and friends rich. In the first 20 years, Win or Lose made $4.3 million off this one oil lease. In today's dollars, that's $38 million.
There is no win or lose about it. It's all win.
We found little written about Win or Lose. It got a short mention in Huey Long's biography. One of the only newspaper writers who delved into it, Bob Barton from Bossier City, who became a state representative for 4 years and now owns a restaurant in New Orleans.
Our little weekly paper tried to publish some information about what was going on.
Why do you think there's been so little written about Win or Lose over the years?
It's a political mess. It's a complicated system that happened a long time ago.
We've spent 2 years digging through the complicated mess, looking at tens of thousands of documents, many 70 years old, even going through these old books in state archives, the only public documentation that shows how much Win or Lose actually made. LSU historian Alicia Long, no relation to Huey, points out a deal like State Lease 340 could be called the norm back in the Huey Long days,
in which it was simply assumed that in order to get deals done, a certain amount of graft would be taken off the top of any particular deal.
If so, this may be the only deal in Louisiana history that is still paying such dividends 70 years later.
I don't know how this government allows this to happen.
As long as drilling continues, the oil lease continues, and the money does too. The contract from 1936 has no end date, so the rights to the royalties keep getting passed down from generation to generation.
It's a right of birth. I mean, if you're in a Win or Lose Corporation, as it is now set up, it's a right of birth. You will get money forever. Forever.
There's nothing anyone's doing about it.
And not a thing.
I'm very proud to be here tonight.
So Huey and Rose Long passed down to their kids, who have now passed down to their grandkids. Each transfer approved by the State Mineral Board.
The state, for various reasons, has continued to perpetuate those contracts, and the folks who are involved, the heirs to the Win or Lose Corporation, continue to reap millions of dollars in benefits, and apparently will continue to do so.
The state has never formally challenged this lease, never formally challenged the transfers. Many people told us off the record that's because of who is involved.
These are some powerful people.
Yeah, they really are. They really are. And most of them are decent people, but they've inherited millions of dollars through an act that took place in the 30s.
Governor Jindal appointed a descendant of W.T. Burton to the LSU board. Here's that descendant, Jack Lawton, getting sworn in. State Senator Gerald Long doesn't appear to be making money off Win or Lose, but he's a third cousin to Huey Long. And if the State Natural Resources Committee would ever take up Win or Lose now, it would go through that committee's chairman, Gerald Long.
For a variety of reasons, and I think people are smart enough to figure out what those reasons are, it has continued to perpetuate itself, and there are millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars every year that could be state revenue that is not state revenue. It goes to private individuals.
So, I mean,
it's a raw deal.
A raw deal that's been a loss for the state, but a lucrative win for a long line of heirs of the late Huey Long. Since 1936, Long and all of the descendants of State Lease 340 have been paid about $273 million. Using the Bureau of Labor Statistics official inflation calculator and recalculating payments made every year, that means in today's dollars off this one lease, all of the descendants have made about $811 million.
It's just an atrocity for someone to receive that amount of money through political action. That you know, that's a breach of their sworn oath of duty to the state. I mean, how can that be a duty to the state? Form a company and reap all this money from it without it being fraud.
Today, interest in State Lease 340 has been passed down to more than 200 different people. We communicated with a few. The heirs point to a lawsuit filed by a New Orleans businessman against James Noe in the 1970s. The judge said the New Orleans businessman couldn't sue Noe. That was up to the Attorney General.
Okay, so how did those two guys, Keith and Norman, get involved or even interested in all of this?
That's a great question. Actually, these guys were just kind of researching their genealogy, their family history, looking at some property records, and saw some property nearby and saw this, and it kind of piqued their interest, and they just kept looking into it more and more, and it just grew over 30 years for them. And one of the big things they say is right now, you know, the state gets 12.5% of the royalties for this oil lease. Most of the leases right now the state gets between 20 and 25% royalties. So it could be 20 to 30 or so $1 million difference for the state every year because of that royalty difference, 12.5% to as much as maybe 25%.
One state oil lease has made descendants of Huey Long and friends hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, we showed you the details of that story last night, where a governor assigned an oil lease, then had part of the lease assigned back to him, earning royalties off the state contract. If a governor did today what was done in 1936 and got interest in a contract he awarded, he would likely go to prison. Of course, it begs the question, if it's something illegal now, why wouldn't the state have recourse to reclaim the people's property, the people's money? We brought that to the State Mineral Board, the board which oversees state leases. How familiar are you with the Win or Lose Corporation?
Not familiar with it at all until this week.
Tom Arnold has been on the State Mineral Board longer than anyone else, 16 years, dating back 3 governors to the Mike Foster administration. But someone with so much Mineral Board experience has little to no knowledge of the Win or Lose Corporation and the beginnings of State Lease 340.
Do you know how that lease came about?
I assume it was a lease sale. I'm not really sure the original lease.
So you don't know what happened?
No.
Louisiana awarded State Lease 340 in 1936. The governor at the time, James Noe, signed a contract with W.T. Burton, who gave a large portion of the lease to the Texas company. Burton then kept some of the royalties from the lease for himself and assigned the rest to the Win or Lose Corporation. Governor Noe and the family and friends of Huey Long made up much of that company, so essentially Noe's approval allowed his own company to make money off the lease.
Well, I don't know how this government allows this to happen.
Keith Crescione has spent 30 years researching win or lose. He says few people know descendants of Huey Long and James Noe still benefit from the lease to this day. By our calculations, the lease has paid Noe and Burton and their heirs, along with heirs to Huey Long, about $273 million since 1936. We recalculated that number, putting it in today's dollars. And off this one lease, the descendants have made $811 million.
That's a great thievery to the state.
So we ran down the details of State Lease 340 to Mineral Board member Tom Arnold.
James Noe is governor of Louisiana.
Okay.
James Noe awards the lease to W.T. Burton.
Telling Arnold how Noe essentially benefited from a contract he awarded to Burton.
He assigns a large portion to the Texas company, which later became Texaco, keeps a little, and then assigns the remaining portion to the Win or Lose Corporation.
Okay.
And the Win or Lose Corporation was made up of James Noe, who was the governor.
That's not right.
And Huey Long and a bunch of other historians call them cronies, if you will.
And those heirs are still benefiting from it?
Yes.
That's different. No, did not know that.
Neither did a former Mineral Board member. We reached Jim McNamara by phone. He spent 6 years in the Mineral Board in the late 1980s through mid-1990s. When we told McNamara the history of State Lease 340, he responded, "Wow," and said that never came up in a meeting. McNamara did say in the 1990s the state worked on a global settlement with Texaco about underpaying royalties, a separate issue from this. They never talked about the beginnings of Lease 340 or about voiding the lease, but McNamara did say the Longs were interested in everything we did.
Taxpayers are going to be just outraged by this.
Sure, and it should be.
Tom Arnold says it's time for the Mineral Board to investigate.
You don't know if there's any recourse for the state here?
Going back, no. Going forward, there could possibly be.
At next Wednesday's board meeting, he'll ask the Attorney General's office to review the lease.
But if the lease should be null and void from back in 1936, maybe the Attorney General should look at it and see what our options are.
State Lease 340 is the fourth most productive lease in the state. Productive for Louisiana in terms of royalties, but also productive for 200 or so heirs, still reaping the benefits from a questionable deal from 1936.
Obviously, some powerful people are still making money off this lease.
Yes.
Do you think that could get in the way of doing something for the state, for the Attorney General, for the board?
It might. The Attorney General he's been fair and honest with us all the way through. I have no reason why he wouldn't be that way. And the Governor General's been very proactive on the Mineral Board.
All Mineral Board members are appointed by the governor. We have a list of the current Mineral Board members on our website.
$273 million. That's money earned over the past 76 years by descendants and friends of the late Huey Long.
Yeah, we showed you that eye-popping number Wednesday night. Earnings from oil royalties on one state lease. Tonight we'll lay out the entire scheme. We've got a lot of numbers in this story, so be ready. But it helps tell the enormity of what the Win or Lose Corporation secured. Part 3 of Dirty Deeds.
$35 million.
That much money?
Imagine getting a check written to you in that amount.
They're worth a lot of money.
In 1986, the son of former Louisiana Governor James Noe took out a mortgage from the Allied Bank of Texas. He received $35 million and used his interest in a state oil lease to pay off the loan.
Using the equity or the collateral of the Win or Lose Corporation.
What does this tell you?
Well, it's a very valuable lease. It's a great deal. I mean, you're going to get millions of dollars the rest of your life, and your family will get millions of dollars the rest of their lives.
We've shown you the $273 or so million heirs of former governors Huey Long, James Noe, and O.K. Allen, along with businessman W.T. Burton, have earned. But that only covers one state lease.
Their insider trading, their knowledge of the oil and gas industry, and their positions as legislators, senators, and governors to, in a sense, extort from the people of Louisiana these mineral rights.
The first lease this group received actually came in October of 1934. State records show Governor O.K. Allen awarded State Lease 309 to his lieutenant governor, James Noe. Less than a month later, Noe transferred his royalty interest in that lease to the newly formed Win or Lose Corporation, a company owned by Noe, Governor Allen, and Senator Huey Long. In July of 1935, Allen awarded State Lease 318 to businessman W.T. Burton. Burton transferred some royalty interest to Win or Lose, but this document shows there was no record of it. Burton paid the state about $33,000 for the lease. Burton assigned some of the rights to the Texas Company, or Texaco, which paid Burton $70,000, an instant profit of $37,000 for Burton. That's $632,000 in today's dollars. Huey Long died in September of 1935, but Win or Lose kept making money, kept receiving interest in oil leases. In December of 1935, O.K. Allen again awards Burton State Lease 335. The assignment to Texaco gives him an instant $40,000 profit. It's another lease Burton assigns to Win or Lose. Governor Allen died in January of 1936. James Noe succeeded him as governor. Noe first awarded State Lease 340, the lease we told you about Wednesday night, one of the most lucrative leases in state history. Next, in February of 1936, Governor Noe gave Burton State Lease 341. It's another lease where there's no official record where Burton transferred part of the royalty interest to Win or Lose. Nonetheless, years later, documents show Win or Lose does receive money off the lease. And in March of 1936, Noe hands over State Lease 344 to Burton. No document exists that transferred rights to Win or Lose. But in 1947, the state sent a letter to Mrs. Huey Long saying they recently checked, writing, "We find that you are the owner of an overriding royalty interest under this lease."
Never drilled the oil well, and through Oscar K. Allen and James Noe gave themselves, like I said, 10 state leases for close to 2 million acres of ground.
Descendants of Win or Lose also have an interest in State Lease 195. That's in Plaquemines Parish. No document exists that shows Win or Lose was given an interest in that state lease. But right now, Lease 195 is the second most productive lease in the state, generating more income than all but one lease. All total, 10 state leases linked to this group, some still profitable, others no longer active. In 1984, they helped a trust run by William Burton Lawton receive a $20 million mortgage. All total, the leases, including State Lease 340, have paid all parties more than $400 million.
They're making that much money?
According to the Bureau of Labor Inflation Calculator, all parties, including original founders and descendants, in today's dollars have been paid more than $1.2 billion.
It's not a case of win or lose, it's a case of right or wrong. We just don't really think it was rightly done, that it was something that doesn't pass the smell test.
We want to explain one thing to you, how we got these big numbers, how we were able to calculate how much money has been earned off the lease. It wasn't easy. We spent days in state offices going through old books, copying down royalty payments for every month of every year. From 1970 on, we were able to get those numbers electronically from the state. We added everything up. The numbers added up was the state's royalty interest. We then had to do a recalculation to calculate how much Win or Lose received. And the numbers are somewhat approximate. We were conservative. Quite frankly, the numbers we are quoting you are probably on the lower end.
So what is the significance of the fact that they couldn't find some of the documentation for some of the lease transfers? Any documentation for some?
That's a good question and could be an important question here, because the state formed the Mineral Board in late 1936. When it was formed, all transfers and assignments had to be approved by the Mineral Board. So if the state has no record of the approval of a transfer, it raises a question, was the transfer invalid?
One of the most asked questions we've gotten since we started our Dirty Deeds investigation is who's making the money now?
Yeah, tonight we'll run down the names of a few heirs who have benefited from a deal in the 1930s where governors awarded oil leases and profited off the contracts by receiving royalties themselves. Their descendants still benefit from those royalties, but tonight we'll tell you what the state could do to stop it.
This map helps tell the story of the money trail from the Win or Lose Corporation. It helps show your money from your property flowing every year out of state.
In 2012, they are still getting their royalties.
Descendants of the Win or Lose Corporation continue to get money, millions every year, and many of them aren't your neighbor. The Win or Lose heirs have scattered in at least 21 states.
It's become almost a birthright for the continuation of the funds going from the Win or Lose Corporation through the state to a select number of people.
This public document from 1994 is the last that lists all of the heirs of Win or Lose. It shows the grandson of the late Huey Long, Palmer Long, collects a royalty check. More recent state records show Palmer Long likely still does, as does his cousin, Rory Scott McFarland, who lives in Boulder, Colorado. Also in the 1994 list, the late U.S. Senator Russell Long. In fact, this 1982 newspaper article said Senator Long supplemented his $60,000 Senate salary with $625,000 that year from oil and gas royalties, care of the Win or Lose deal from the 1930s. Long has since passed and passed on his interest. The 1994 records show Earl Christenberry Jr., the son of Huey Long's late secretary, collects a royalty check. Christenberry lives in New Orleans. According to state records, Christenberry still has a royalty interest. The 1994 document shows more than 150 owners of some type of royalty interest. Some have a little stake in the oil leases, others much greater.
Most of them are decent people, but they've inherited millions of dollars through an act that took place in the 30s.
The state says more than 200 people now hold an interest in these lucrative state leases. Leases awarded by governors in the 1930s and then assigned to a company those same governors had a stake in.
How do we fix that? If it was wrong back then, obviously it was. Today that would never happen, because in order to actually be on a mineral board and award leases, you can have nothing to do with any mineral or oil companies. Where do we go?
That's what we've been asking for weeks, getting in touch with attorneys, trying to find out if the state has any legal method to cancel the 1936 contract.
It was their deal to make. It's their deal to undo.
4 attorneys we talked to pointed to Louisiana Civil Code and a legal term called the absolute nullity of contracts as the most likely possibility. The law says a contract is absolutely null when it violates a rule of public order, as when the object of a contract is illicit or immoral.
If you could prove somehow that the public fisc, that is the sort of money used in the state for the people of the state, was somehow misappropriated, I think that could be a strong case.
When a contract is ruled absolutely null, that means it never existed, and the law states the parties must be restored to the situation that existed before the contract was made. So if the contract is ruled absolutely null, the state could claim damages from the past.
You don't necessarily have to prove fraud.
No, you do not have to prove fraud. You'd have to prove that the contract violated, again, a rule of public order.
Attorneys we talked to say the state could take a few paths to try and null the contract. First, by looking at the Louisiana criminal laws as of 1936, and specifically the section on bribery and corruption in office. At that time, the state had a statute called Officer Influencing Awarding of Contract. This law says any public officer of this state who shall exercise his power or use his position to secure the awarding of any contract for the construction of work, or to secure the custody of any public funds to any partnership of which he is a member or to any corporation of which he is an officer, shall be deemed guilty. Remember, documents we have show James Noe as the president of the Win or Lose Corporation, and while he continued to be a member of Win or Lose, Noe became governor. Days later, he awarded State Lease 340 to W.T. Burton, and Burton then assigned part of the royalties from that lease, royalties coming from public land, back to Win or Lose and Noe.
He certainly gave some of these rights away that he later benefited from.
Fox 8 legal analyst Joe Respani says Noe could have broken that 1936 state law. Other documents show Noe may not have awarded the lease to the highest bidder. Attorneys say another possible option for the state to null the contract. Burton paid a $75,000 upfront bonus and $500,000 once he produced the first oil. A competing bid by Gulf Oil had a lower bonus, $61,000, but a higher oil payment, $1.2 million. It had state employee Edward Gay question in this 1941 memo whether or not the lease was granted to the person submitting the most advantageous bid as required by law. So the state made $575,000 from the Burton bid, but they could have made $1.3 million from Gulf. That's a difference of $736,000. To put that in a number you might understand better, the $736,000, $12.1 million in today's dollars. And some attorneys point us to one case that could help the state recoup money. And this lease. It involves former Plaquemines District Attorney Leander Perez. After his death, the Plaquemines Council sued his descendants in the 1980s for oil royalties they inherited from a Perez deal in the 1930s. Perez represented the parish levy boards, which handed out the lease, and also made money from the company which got the lease, Delta Development. The courts ruled that Perez breached his fiduciary duty. Perez's family ended up losing that royalty interest. If James Noe breached his fiduciary duty, some attorneys say that could make the contract absolutely null.
There are a number of ways that you could possibly say this was a nullity, or that there were enough problems that you legally would have a basis for reopening the lease. But it would be normally up to the state to raise those. And up to this point, they've not done that.
These contracts have earned descendants of win or lose hundreds of millions of dollars. In 1994, of the 150 or so descendants, 88 of them, more than half, lived out of state, money being derived from state land leaving Louisiana, like the royalties that go to David Stair in Sonoma, California. He owns Dry Creek Vineyard. He founded it in 1972, but has interest in Louisiana state leases, passed down from former Governor O.K. Allen.
One other key point about the absolute nullity of a contract is that it has no prescription or statute of limitations. So if a contract is ruled absolutely null, the year the contract was signed is irrelevant.
State lawmakers want the Attorney General to investigate findings from a series of Fox 8 investigations.
Lawmakers want to give AG Buddy Caldwell until the end of this year to find out if oil leases from the 1930s are and were valid, and if the state can cancel the contracts.
The statue of Huey Long stands steps away from the state capitol he built in the 1930s. Inside the walls today, lawmakers drafted a resolution trying to stop a scheme Huey Long started about the same time he convinced the public and legislature to fund the construction of this building.
It's a surprise to everybody here in the legislature.
Lawmakers just learned in the past few days lucrative oil leases awarded in the 1930s have sent hundreds of millions of dollars to descendants of three former governors, Long, James Noe, and O.K. Allen, from a questionable deal they hatched. As governors, they awarded oil leases, and then royalties from the leases were assigned to the Win or Lose Corporation, a company the three governors had a stake in.
You read about the Huey Long days and the methods of their business practices. You know, it was bad, and it's a history that's embedded in Louisiana still today.
It's something from old Louisiana, as I like to call it, from back in the 1930s, something that slipped underneath the radar.
State Representative Pat Connick drafted the resolution, along with Nick LaRusso and Robert Billiot. It's a resolution to authorize and request the Attorney General to investigate mineral lease contracts with the Win or Lose Corporation.
It seems on its face that there would be some issues that money should be into coming back to the state's coffers.
Rebidding just one of those state leases, State Lease 340, could generate an extra $20 to $30 million for Louisiana every year. A significant amount of money for lawmakers and the governor to fill some serious budget holes.
We're cutting health care, we're cutting education. $20 million, we could fund the school systems better. We could put more money in classrooms. We could do some pay raises.
In today's dollars, the Win or Lose Corporation and the descendants have been paid more than $1 billion since 1940. And right now, more than half of the royalty owners live out of state. Money from Louisiana leases flowing to at least 21 different states.
You know, that sweet deal is not good for the state of Louisiana, and they are reaping the benefits off the backs of the people of Louisiana.
The House will take up this resolution in the next 2 weeks.
And it's something that we need to fix. And look, it's just something, if we discover on our watch, it's our responsibility to solve the problem and fix it.
But ultimately, it will be in the hands of the Attorney General, Buddy Caldwell, who who will decide if Louisiana can and will try to fix the kind of deal one lawmaker says has helped hold Louisiana back for years.
The Attorney General needs to come in and find some kind of legal mechanism to stop these leases from paying out.
We have requested an interview with Attorney General Buddy Caldwell and await a response from his office.
State Attorney General Buddy Caldwell has been told to investigate questionable oil leases that date back to the 1930s.
Yeah, the State Mineral Board met today in Baton Rouge and asked its attorney, the Attorney General, to see if the state has grounds to cancel the leases.
Item number 2 is to hear public comment regarding a series of articles by an investigative reporting team from Fox 8 News New Orleans.
The public comment came from West Bank residents Keith Crescione and his friend Norman Billiot, who spent 30 years researching the questionable oil leases from the 1930s.
I'm in pursuit of this justice, you know, and this board, I really call on.
Crescione says he's taken his findings to state government before, but has been shown the door.
I also met with an assistant attorney general several years ago. I brought this all up to him about win or lose. And I said, I kept him going, well, how can they get away with this? How can this keep happening, whatever? And his answer was, I said, is it that political? And his answer was, yeah. That was it. Case closed.
Fox 8 News has detailed in a series of stories how former governors awarded oil leases in the 1930s. The governors themselves profited off royalties from those leases, and their shares have been passed down to descendants. Total earnings for all involved, hundreds of millions of dollars.
The biggest lease of them all, State Lease 340 in St. Mary Parish. Here's what happened. In January of 1936, James Noe becomes governor of Louisiana. In early February, he assigned State Lease 340 to W.T. Burton. Burton assigns some of the royalties to the Texas company, keeps some himself, and then assigns the rest to the Win or Lose Corporation. That's a company whose president was Governor James Noe. In fact, as governor, Noe had to and did approve the assignment from Burton to his company, Win or Lose.
It's just unfair to the Louisiana citizens.
Crescione asked the Mineral Board to act.
And what I'd like to ask you guys, what are y'all going to do about it? You know, that's why I'm here mainly today, you know.
The board heard from its attorney, who made them aware of a State House resolution introduced yesterday that authorizes and requests State Attorney General Buddy Caldwell to investigate if the leases were valid, are currently valid, and if any money can be recovered by the state.
At the end of this, that the board action would mirror what the legislature is asking for, and that is that the information be studied by the Attorney General's office, which is, by statutory law, the attorney for the Mineral Board.
Could you get the Attorney General to act upon this so that the sins of the past can be shown and be healed?
Board member Tom Arnold made a motion to ask the Attorney General to open an investigation.
Any discussion by the board concerning Mr. Arnold's motion?
No discussion, but no opposition.
Is there any verbal objection to the motion or objection? Chair hearing none. Motion passes unanimously.
The board will give the Attorney General until the end of this year to present his findings.
The Attorney General's office says it's awaiting the request by the Mineral Board and will also comply with the House resolution when it passes. The AG used the term when.
The State Mineral Board has signed and is in the process of delivering a resolution to the Attorney General that asks Buddy Caldwell to investigate questionable leases from the 1930s.
Tonight we continue our investigation into dirty deeds, what the state has and has not done in the past to try to cancel oil leases that have earned 3 former governors and their descendants hundreds of millions of dollars.
Seconds after West Bank resident Norman Billiot made these comments to the State Mineral Board.
Could you get the Attorney General to act upon this so that the sins of the past can be shown and be healed?
A Mineral Board member from Shreveport asked the only question from that part of the meeting.
Has the AG ever looked into this before?
The answer is yes and no. The yes comes in the early 1940s. This memo by state employee Edward Gay Jr. concludes a State Lease 318 was obtained through a conspiracy to defraud the state of Louisiana. one of the many leases where governors awarded the lease, then profited off that contract through the Win-or-Lose Corporation. Another memo by state employee C.C. Wood came to the same conclusion. A conspiracy was effected between Burton and James A. No.
It's shocking to me that in the 40s, someone would issue an opinion and say that the lease was illegally obtained, and since the 40s, now what are we talking about, 60 years, 70 years? Nothing else has happened.
We never found any other document addressing the alleged conspiracy in that state lease, but in another, a special assistant for the Attorney General, Edward Gladney, did write, "We are not aware of any charge of fraud in the granting of this lease." That's no surprise to LSU historian Alicia Long, no relation to Huey Long's family. She says state investigations into Win-or-Lose didn't go too far during that time, even when anti-Long governors were in power.
There was so much intimidation around the state that it was difficult to bring people like Long or his cronies to trial because juries in Louisiana wouldn't find those people guilty.
Also keep in mind, in 1939 and 1940, Huey Long's brother Earl was governor of Louisiana, and he had an ally in the Attorney General's office from 1956 to 1972, that ally being Jack Gremillon. Fast forward to the 1970s, and businessman Louis Roussel filed suit against James No. Roussel said No fraudulently acquired royalty interests in state mineral leases in violation of No's fiduciary duties. In his biography, Roussel said he dropped the case because he didn't want to sue his friends Seymour Weiss and Earl Christenberry, also members of Win-or-Lose. In fact, Roussel said he got the information that he used in the lawsuit from Seymour Weiss. In that biography, Roussel wrote, "I went to see Billy Gus, the Attorney General at the time, to see what he thought about the case. He didn't want to tangle with Russell Long because he was too powerful. He thought I ought to stay out of it. Gus apparently stayed out of it too. Russell Long is Huey's son and was senator at the time." By the way, a St. Mary Parish judge did eventually rule against Roussel in the lawsuit. The state had another chance to go after Win-or-Lose in the 1990s. The state sued Texaco for underpaying royalties.
We tried to bring that to people's attention in the 90s, and it really didn't get anywhere.
Bob Barton wrote for a weekly newspaper in Bossier City. At that time, he wanted the Attorney General, Richard Ayoub, to look into the Win-or-Lose Corporation.
What we had hoped at that point in time is that the state would really look at how the contract was initiated, how the corporation was formed, and what assets that corporation gathered. But that really didn't happen. They really turned kind of a blind eye to what had happened in the 30s and just looked at the contract per se at that point in time.
At the same time, records show Ayoub received campaign contributions from some of the descendants. James No Jr., the law firm Russell Long formed, William B. Lawton Company, William Shattuck, to name a few.
Could that have created a conflict for him when he's handling this?
Well, yes. I think it's a conflict of interest for him to have done that.
In Barton's newspaper columns from the 1990s, he wrote, "Why didn't the Attorney General include Win-or-Lose in the lawsuit? Were Louisiana politicians afraid of Win-or-Lose and afraid to question an agreement that was making many of them rich?"
They weren't looking into what the Win-or-Lose Corporation was getting.
Barton says one attorney for the state said they could have sued Win-or-Lose, but suing Win-or-Lose would have kept the issue tied up in the court for several more years. Barton points out the lawsuit between Texaco and the state was handled by federal Judge John Parker, who received his appointment from Senator Russell Long.
People scared?
I don't know if people are scared or they're just, it's been around so long and they just think it's part of the way of life, and it's established, and it just continues to perpetuate itself.
Attorneys say any court fight by the state now would not be easy. The deals took place in the 1930s, and some of the legal grounds the state could have to sue have been prescribed, meaning the legal time has passed where the state can sue. And one attorney adds the actions of Gus and Ayoub would not help the state's case now. No Attorney General has decided to sue the founders or descendants of Win-or-Lose. A state suit has never gone to a judge and jury. That's why Tulane's Mark Davis says he thinks the best next step is for the current Attorney General, Buddy Caldwell, to investigate. As we've pointed out before, if a governor today pulled off a deal like this, he would likely go to jail. So if something is illegal now, Why doesn't the state have a way to reclaim the people's property, the people's money?
If you have possible grounds for revisiting this, was state property effectively given away? Were there, questionable practices that, could allow you to undo this lease? All that could be there, but if you're unwilling to look at it, it never comes up.
Politics from the 1930s continues to this day, and that's what one West Bank resident said as he left Baton Rouge this afternoon.
A House committee rejected a resolution that would ask the Attorney General to investigate questionable oil leases from the 1930s. Fox 8 has laid out the dirty deeds in a series of stories. Today's vote won't necessarily stop an AG investigation since the Mineral Board separately voted in favor of it. But it does show the power of the people making money off these lucrative oil leases.
Two West Bank residents pleaded their case to the House Judiciary Committee.
The simple wrong, the simple fraud, the simple conspiracy, the simple collusion, and the extreme political subterfuge continues to this day.
But some of the committee members appeared to have little interest in what Norman Billiot and Keith Crescione said.
We got a little over 2 weeks left in the session, and we got a lot of folks that are they're getting their minds are getting taxed, and we're getting kind of aggravated at each other.
Opelousas Representative Ladrika Theory came out firing questions first.
How many times has this issue been investigated?
Representative Theory, I think the allegation that has never been fully investigated. It's it's unfortunate that the attorney generals, we're all political here. We all have relationships with individuals that we work with, and I think the allegation is the contracts. We need to look into how the contracts were initiated, how the contracts were formed, and what assets did the corporation gather.
Some lawmakers appear to be uncertain of the issue.
It's all about the issue of did they get a good deal or not, right?
Critics say the issue is not whether the deal was good, but whether it was fair, ethical, against the law, and whether descendants of 3 former governors should continue to profit off a questionable deal from the 1930s. Representative Pat Connick wants the Attorney General to investigate.
I understand it'd be a fresh set of eyes, but I'm looking at Governor Edwards, Governor Treen, Attorney General Ayub, Attorney General Gust, all these lawsuits where things have been settled, and it looks like it's all been resolved.
Sources tell Fox 8 News heirs to the win or lose interest in oil leases have been lobbying some lawmakers all week, giving them a handout that shows the timeline of State Lease 340, the most lucrative lease.
Based on the handout, it's showing that it was investigated 5 times and that there were 4 lawsuits.
But what Baton Rouge Representative Hunter Green and Opelousas Rep Ladrika Theory don't say is that lawsuits by Gust and Ayub never addressed the legality of State Lease 340. As we reported this week, Gust told businessman Louis Roussel he didn't want to tangle with Russell Long because he was too powerful. Remember, Russell Long made money off these leases and was a U.S. senator for 4 decades. And the 2 state representatives also didn't point out that AG Richard Ayub didn't address the issue. In fact, someone in his office told a newspaper writer at the time they could sue win or lose, but chose not to because it would be tied up in the courts. Ayub also took campaign contributions from descendants making money off the leases. At the same time, he decided not to pursue legal action against them. Also, Representative Hunter Green pointed out former Governor Edwin Edwards looked at it. At one time, Edwards served as an attorney for Texaco, the company doing the drilling on State Lease 340. They were assigned royalties on part of the lease in 1936. The Attorney General said it would cost $500,000 to investigate. Some lawmakers balked at the dollar figure.
Does the governor have $500,000 willing to put towards this?
I'm sure we do have. We got all kinds of money that's been wasted in this state, so we can find some money somewhere.
12 nays and 2 yeas, and that resolution fails to pass.
In the end, the resolution failed. 2 committee members voted for it, Connick and Brian Adams from the West Bank.
The past history of the state is an unfortunate thing that everyone has to live with.
And Norman Billiot and Keith Crescione say after today's vote, nothing has changed.
Suggesting that it was politics back then is politics now.
5 lawmakers from our area voted against the resolution in committee today. They are John Bell Edwards from Amite, Randall Gaines out of LaPlace, Chalmette's Ray Garofalo, Chris Leopold from Belle Chase, and Gregory Miller from Norco. A spokesperson for the governor's office sent us this statement today. The Mineral Board has already asked the AG to look into the issue, and we think that's the appropriate action to take.
We roamed the halls of the state capitol trying to find out why a state house committee overwhelmingly voted down a resolution that asked the attorney general to look at questionable oil leases.
Those leases have been the subject in a series of our investigations on dirty deeds. What we found, a lobbyist and a lawmaker working behind the scenes to get the resolution voted down, to allow descendants of 3 former governors, including Huey Long, to continue making tens of millions of dollars off public land. Mr. Rommel, Lee Zurich with Channel 8.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, sir?
Doing good.
Ty Bromwell's been a fixture behind the scenes in Baton Rouge for 15 years. You probably don't know him, but your lawmaker does. And apparently Bromwell's got some power and influence inside the walls of the state capitol. When the House Judiciary Committee rejected a resolution that would look into questionably obtained oil leases from the 1930s,
12 nays and 2 yeas, and that resolution failed to pass.
West Bank resident Keith Crescione called the meeting a setup.
Suggesting that it was politics back then is politics now.
Turns out the politicians of today voted down the resolution after hearing privately from Ty Bromwell, a Baton Rouge lobbyist who urged lawmakers to vote no.
Who had you lobby on behalf of the House resolution from last week?
Some friends.
Did they pay you?
They did not.
Who were the friends?
Just friends.
Were you talked to by Ty Bromwell?
Yes. As a lobbyist, he indicated to me that he was familiar with some of the chronology of the events, and he thought that probably would not be any purpose served in moving the resolution forward.
AMEET Representative John Bell Edwards cast a no vote after speaking to the lobbyist. Bromwell convinced Edwards multiple lawsuits and attorneys general have reviewed leases awarded by Governors James Noe and O.K. Allen, where Noe, Allen, and a company called the Win or Lose Corporation received royalties off the leases the governors awarded. Descendants of Noe, Allen, and Huey Long still make money to this day. Representative Edwards says the information presented at the meeting showed the state had investigated and found no wrongdoing. In the committee's mind, their vote was meaningless.
The Attorney General's office has been asked by the Mineral Board to look into this, so another action by the Judiciary Committee really wouldn't have served any additional purpose.
Committee members say the basis of their vote came from testimony from resolution sponsor Pat Connick and information provided by the lobbyist. The lobbyist won.
From my perspective, all I had was what was presented at the table. I've gone back and looked at your stories, and actually it sounds like there may be some reason to look into this further. Is it up to us to say that? All that was presented to us by Representative Connick was a House concurrent resolution, which really has no power at all.
At that committee meeting, members repeatedly referenced a document given to them by Bromwell, the lobbyist.
Based on the handout, it's showing that it was investigated 5 times and that there were 4 lawsuits.
Former lawmaker and newspaperman Bob Barton wrote some stories on the Win or Lose Corporation in the 1990s. We showed him the document distributed by the lobbyist.
They are the legally hired lobbyist for the Win or Lose Corporation, and it comes as no surprise that they would say there's no reason to investigate it.
He says the lobbyist information isn't factually correct. Barton says many of the lawsuits referenced in the document never looked into the money going to descendants of the 3 former governors.
I don't know of anyone else who actually looked into it in an official capacity, in a public capacity.
Barton says he only knows of one legal opinion issued by someone with the state attorney general. The one we showed him, where Edward Gay concluded in 1941 the lease was obtained through a conspiracy to defraud the state of Louisiana.
At the end of the day, it's a $300 million paycheck to the heirs, to the heirs, to the heirs of the Huey Long dynasty. That's a lot of money. $300 million would balance the state budget this year. That's what we're talking about in terms of closing colleges and hospitals.
State Senator Gary Smith from St. Charles Parish has been busy in Baton Rouge trying to balance the budget. But sources say he found time to urge some colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee to vote down the House resolution related to the oil leases. Senator Smith happens to be married to Huey Long's great-granddaughter. That would make her former Senator Russell Long's granddaughter. Remember, while alive, Russell Long made more than $600,000 a year off win or lose oil and gas royalties. So Senator Gary Smith's extended family benefits to this day off this deal. And last week, State Representative Randall Gaines confirmed to us by phone Smith spoke to him about the upcoming vote. Which brings us back to the lobbyist, Ty Brommel, who also helped convince lawmakers to vote down the resolution. You see, Brommel distributed a fact sheet, told lawmakers why they should vote no, but when we caught up with him, seemed unclear about all the facts of State Lease 340, where James Noah's governor awarded a lease to businessman W.T. Burton. And days later, Burton awarded a royalty interest in the lease back to No and the Win or Lose Corporation.
Do you think it was okay back then for a governor to profit off of a deal? And for people to still be making money off that?
I don't think a governor profited off the deal. I don't think...
you don't think James No made money off that deal?
I don't know anything about James No. I mean, that was... I don't...
So you don't know anything about the deal, but you were lobbying on its behalf?
I wasn't lobbying. I was asking people to look into it before they made decisions with dollars being expended.
So you don't know how the deal was started in 1936?
I don't need to know how it was done. I mean, someone asked me to help with something, I did. That's it.
And you won't tell us who helped you?
I don't need to tell you who helped me. I mean, I'm not hiding anything, but a friend of mine asked me to assist.
State laws require a lobbyist to report clients only if the lobbyist is being paid or if the lobbyist is spending money, like buying a lawmaker lunch on the client's behalf. If a lobbyist works for free and spends no money, we have no way to tell who that lobbyist works for.
The State Mineral Board says despite a House resolution being voted down, their vote counts, and the Attorney General will still look into questionable oil leases from the 1930s.
Board member Tom Arnold says what happened was at the very least unethical, and now it's up to the AG to find out if the state has a way out. The actions of the past week have a State Mineral Board member skeptical.
Obviously, there's something there. Lobbyists wouldn't be lobbying if everything was out in the open, was fair.
Tom Arnold has been monitoring the votes at the state capitol. In fact, his brother Jeff Arnold chairs the House committee that voted down a resolution that would request the Attorney General investigate those questionable oil leases. Arnold's aware a lobbyist urged lawmakers to vote no.
Who had you lobby on behalf of the House resolution from last week?
Some friends.
Did they pay you?
They did not.
Who were the friends?
Just friends.
And Arnold says some Mineral Board members have started to get calls, too.
So you think the lobbyists just took too long to get to them?
I think we blindsided them. I think they weren't ready for it.
The Mineral Board voted earlier this month to request the Attorney General investigate. And since that vote, Arnold says he's gotten plenty of feedback.
During this process of the investigative series, I've been getting phone calls. People ask me, this is wrong. A lot of them don't fully understand it. Yeah. A lot of them have questions about it. Well, the public's not sure that it's legal. The Attorney General should look at it. I mean, he works for the people. He's the public defender in this case.
The Attorney General says it would cost $500,000 to investigate.
I think it's a good investment. You know, $500,000 for a $30 million return. It's a good deal.
Canceling the leases would get the state at least $30 million a year and would cost descendants of 3 former governors, Huey Long, James No, and O.K. Allen, tens of millions.
No, you shouldn't pay for the sins of your father. No, so nobody should pay for the sins of their father, but you shouldn't profit from the sins of your great-grandfather. That's what's happening.
What's happening now is work behind the scenes. A lobbyist trying to stop any investigation. A state senator who's married to Huey Long's great-granddaughter talking to his colleagues, too. It has Tom Arnold wondering, is that a sign the state may have a chance to get out of the leases?
Do you think they're lobbying because they're concerned that there's an out for the state?
Somebody thinks there's a concern. They wouldn't be making those phone calls.
Arnold says the Attorney General will issue a report to the Mineral Board before the end of the year. Exclusively on Fox8Live.com, we've posted Huey Long's FBI files, more than 1,700 pages of FBI documents that investigate potential corruption by Louisiana's former governor. You can look at the entire file on our website, Fox8Live.com.